And you are welcome along to this week's edition of the Huddle Breakdown, where we are recording a day early due to accommodating some schedules, so apologies for that. And as a result, our friend Laura was unable to join us this week, but she'll be back next week. And we're on more of our normal production schedule. So, Alan, how are you doing?
Yeah, all good, all good. Getting there, getting caught up after, you feel like you don't deserve a holiday. You come back and there's games all over the place. New manager potentially, away wins as well. 3 in a week.
Right.
Amazing.
Well, the theoretical new manager, which is where we're going to start this week, which is this kind of dragging out process of getting the new manager. I think December 1st was the widely rumored starting point. Talk of paperwork issues and et cetera, et cetera. But what's happened now is we've created this, I wouldn't call it a controversy, but a discussion. I wouldn't even call it a debate, a discussion about whether the timing of this makes any sense at all, given the run that Celtic have been on, particularly domestically, but a great result against Feyenoord last week, about, just sticking with it, let it ride. You got a hot craps table, Alan. You got to press your bets. You don't walk away. So is that what's your point of view here? Should we be pressing our bets and sticking with Martin
Doubling,
O'Neill?
doubling down,
That's right.
double down.
Split and double down.
Yeah, this is a no-win situation in a sense because the amount of sort of positive sentiment for Martin O'Neill being there is just like overwhelming, and it's almost also if following our normal house style of being a little bit more analytical and you know critical in a positive sense of for the benefit of rather than for trying to pick fights. It's
We'll
just
do
a
that
very
later when we talk about Hearts. But go ahead. I'm
yeah,
sorry.
no, we mustn't do that because it appears that Derek McInnes is incredibly thin-skinned, which is delicious. But we'll come back to that one. So yeah, so having a honest, open, you know, critical conversation about Martin O'Neill and his time, I think is incredibly difficult to do. But I'll try. Right? Well, first thing to say is I wouldn't criticize him at all. Actually, that's not the intention because he's been placed into the situation. He's willingly come along and picked up the pieces of what was apparently a very unhappy place with lots of unhappy people not performing well, lots of injuries, and that's not on him. And in terms of where we are now, in terms of outcomes, we're in a much happier place. Everyone seems to be in a much more positive about things. So he's generally had a very positive impact on everybody, it would seem. And I don't think you could debate that. And even if things had gone slightly wrong, I don't think you could criticize him because of the situation that he'd been put in. So this isn't a case of bashing Martin O'Neill at all because bless him. And he's just his interview on Sky after the game was just fantastic. If you haven't seen it, he's just a great guy, really. So for me, he's kind of immune from that. Um, but on the other hand, we're here to look at performances, and the performances, the outcomes, of course, have been brilliant. And you can paint a beautiful picture of only one defeat. Brilliant away, rare away win at a high profile club. A Derby dust sprinkling of goodness and a League Cup final, and so on and so forth. And getting back to within a point or whatever it is at the top of the league. In fact, you win games in hand, you're back ahead of it again, and that's all absolutely true. And I think it's a great performance to have achieved that from where he started, which was a very low point, I think, for the whole club. My other sort of balancing perspective on this is that, the performances have been patchy. And I think one of the issues is that, and this is, I'm not saying this is O'Neill's fault, this is just the way it's panning out, is that, we've come from a place over the last 4 seasons at least where Celtic has been incredibly consistent in its performances. Yes, there have been the odd blip. Of course they have, and especially when the season, the league's already won, and the odd Dortmund game, and then you had Rodgers, failing to get his arms around Barry Ferguson metaphorically in the last season. So it's not been perfect by any means, but in the round, Celtic have had a very, very consistent performance level in terms of the way that they play and the way that they operate, and the outcomes that came from that were, I would say, very consistent as well. If you look at the relentlessness of Ange's second season, etc., and Rodgers' last season as well, and it just feels like at the moment it's a little bit chaotic, and that's been my point about when I've talked about game models is, you know, keep the structure of the things that work and then add on your little bits on top of it, but don't change the fundamentals of how the team plays. And I think we have strayed away from that. Um, and that may have been a choice, or it might just be a function of O'Neill trying to work out who should be playing and the team lineup changing and it not being coherent because, I mean, if you look at the lineup, if we were sat here a month ago, 2 months ago saying, yeah, well, I'm Yang on the left and McCowan on the right and Donovan at right back and Trusty will be back in and, and Hatate will be playing really well. We'll be like, what you want about? That's just like ridiculous. None of that stuff's going to happen. And here we are. So, hey, football. 1 week is a long time in football, etc. So I guess I'm not attributing blame for this situation because I think we've been in a fortunate situation of getting a lot of good outcomes despite some very patchy performances. And when I say patchy, they range from catastrophic in Midtjylland to bloody hell, sort this out in the League Cup semi-final to, my God, seat of the pants, St Mirren, and a little bit at Hibs, which I think is more justifiable in a way, given other contexts. And then we've had a few kind of comfortable home wins. So there's a lot to me. There's just a huge variability in performances, and it just unsettles me because I'm not used to it. I'm used to the consistency of the last 4 years, I suppose, with the same kind of group of players. But again, I'm not attributing blame to Martin O'Neill. What I'm asking for, and to come to the point of the conversation, is why I want the new manager in is just to get everybody settled again and get it, on an even keel again, and because it's just too disruptive, I think, at the moment. And that's no harm to Martin. There's no criticism from me. He's done an amazing job. He's had some amazing outcomes. Everybody's fallen in love with him all over again. It's been a great story, but we just need to get back to being a consistent, coherent team. And I think we need to, step into having a new manager to do that. And I don't think delaying it is going to help. And I appreciate, first game against Hearts is not ideal, but on the other hand, what are you going to do? Say to him, oh, we're not really sure about you. We think there's a lot of risk in you coming along, so we're just going to stick with this old guy till, for a bit longer, until we feel a bit more comfortable with it. We're not going to do that. That's ludicrous. We need a new manager. We need to get the new manager in. We need to get the staff in, and we need to get going. And we need to get preparing for January. And sooner that happens, the more I think we will be in a position to start being a lot more consistent in our performances.
Well, I'll segue that to kind of share my thoughts, but to quote our friend Derek McInnes from the weekend, as he's beginning to get a bit rattled, it seems to me. I agree.
He certainly is.
Is that the league table doesn't lie, and
you should ask Tony Bloom about that. Tony
right.
Bloom made a fortune on disproving that exact theory. Brilliant.
Yep.
I saw that. I thought this is gold dust.
Yes, actor in the wrong movie. But the reason why I use that as a segue, other than to, I enjoy what's going on there, is one of the reasons that we try as hard as we can. It's difficult enough to figure out what's already happened in the past and to come up with a reasonably robust performance attribution framework, which I've spent the last several years trying to do. Knowing that it's flawed, you don't have perfect measurement, you can be wrong, all of these factors that enter into it, let alone using that to try and then forecast into the future. The past is hard enough. And the low-hanging fruit is looking at, reasonably robust gauges of performances versus results. Like, that's the simple stuff. That's the exercise that would have prevented Aberdeen from hiring Barry Robson, because he went on a heater. We talk about variance and positive variance and negative variance. It's basically luck. It's, different ways of characterizing these things. When a guy's got a sitter on the opposition who misses it, we've had, and during Martin O'Neill's domestic games that he's been in charge, we've had 6 shots against us from within 9 yards. I looked it up this morning. None of them have been on target. And the aggregate XG has been almost 2 in all of them. Okay. Did Martin O'Neill have any control over that? Did the fact that McMiniman was like 2 inches away from tapping in across, it's 4 yards out from the goal. These are the very fine margins that are variance in some of these games that would have completely tilted narrative versus, and the fact that these games were that close on an underlying performance basis. Or I would argue, and I agree with you, I mean, the Midtjylland game and the St. Mirren game in particular were 2 of the worst underlying performances that we've had in recent times. So again, none of this is to be critical, and I'm not, we need context with an incoming manager who's coming in really tough circumstances now. So, context is going to be important on how we analyze the performances under him as well. So this is not a criticism of, Martin O'Neill stepping into the breach. It's trying to accurately assess what actually happened. Okay. And whether or not those performances suggest projectability into the future, or is it more like what we're now seeing, and this all fits into the narrative. Martin O'Neill had no control over the fact that Hearts were due, my good friend Martin Murphy, Hearts were due for some negative variance. They had overperformed early in the season, not to the degree Aberdeen did last season. So that's kind of a lazy, understandable recency bias analogy that people have been using, but just not performing at a level where they're going to forever have Kirsovidis scoring from 25 yards, top shelving it, or the Jamestown subs coming on and bailing out his catastrophic tactics and selections. So, they were due, and the fact that we've clawed back, this is like, I talk about the controllable versus uncontrollable variance, and Martin O'Neill couldn't, and Sean Maloney couldn't control Hearts going through this retrenchment. Couldn't control the fact that we've had back-to-back games where opposition keepers were a train wreck, an absolute travesty, that helped us get these results. And that's what we're talking about here. So how do we kind of decompose what actually happened and say, okay, was this because of some actual uptick in performance? Like we have seen in some players, which we'll get to in a second, because that's been legitimate, like you said with Hatate, or how much of it's just been, well, we were kind of due, or just normal, this, like, as you said, this is football. When you get into 5, 6, 7, 8 games a month, 2 months, like with Barry Robson, there was Neil Lennon's tenure in the 18-19 season where, we got it over the line. There was a lot of squishy performances mixed in there that we, kind of broke our way and made it, a comfortable march to the league title and the cup. So it's just drawing that line somewhere. And that's wanted to start off with that today because it's a topic that a lot of people are talking about, and, get the sentimentality. Doesn't mean that there's not going to be major issues potentially with this transition to a new manager. It's a question, when do you do it? And I tend to agree with you that I want Martin O'Neill leaving on the crest of this wave. Like, I think it's absolutely perfect. We'll get to Dundee in a minute or in a little bit. You probably couldn't, come up with an opposition in his last game, if it is his last game at home, in a lab that would be more suitable and perfect for us. Again, can't predict the future. One never knows, but Dundee are awful and have been awful. So yeah, I thought we'd start off with that. So let's segue with the the little bit of the Hibs performance, but more importantly, let's talk about our favorite Celtic player of recent history that we have 100% always been a huge fan of and never said a bad word about, Reo Hatate. So, Alan, take it from here. Let's have a glowing discussion about our favorite player.
Yeah, so just wanted to highlight some numbers, obviously. So but essentially, this is Rio Hatate comparing from the start of the season to after the Midtjylland game, and then the last four matches essentially. So it's four games and then everything before that, and just some picking out some high level metrics. And apologies, I've acronymed all these, so let me just put a little bit of color and context on some of these. But essentially, if we start with things that he should be good at, number of chances created, last four games, 3.19, uh, average 90 per 90 minute average. Before that, 1.29. He's doubled the number of passes he's putting into the danger zone. These DZ passes. These are passes into a great area, center of the goal, inside the box. That's doubled in the last four games to previously. His pack passing score has gone up from just over 34 to just over 40, and consequently, his attacking threat score has gone up, and also his expected scoring contribution has gone up significantly from 0.36 per game to 0.54. That's his expected goals plus expected assists. All very, very positive, all significant upticks, albeit small sample, four games, but he really has come to life. And as I say, the tell for me is just his movement with the ball, is wriggling out of tight areas, his Iniesta-like ability to sneak his way out of a tricky spot with a drop of the shoulder, drop of the hips, etc. He doesn't do that when he's not on it. He just doesn't do it, and he's been doing it the last four games, and it's great to see because he's just so exciting to watch. The last column is very interesting. This is the stat that was almost invented to critique Reo Hatate, which is the pack turnover score, and it's expressed as a negative because it's basically means that you're losing the ball, and by doing so, your own players are wrong side of the ball relative to your own goal. So he's kind of taking them out of the game essentially by giving the ball away. And his pack turnover score is the highest, has always been the highest of any player since I started collecting it. And so his average is 21, minus 21 this season. But that's dropped in the last four games to under minus 10. Now, context, as we always say, I think so. Why is this happening? Well, you could be very cynical and talk about impending transfer windows and impending World Cups. I'm sure there are some cynical people out there, but I like to think that Reo Hatate, being the being the great professional that he is, may just be benefiting from a couple of things. One is, despite what James and I, as opinion has been in the past, and as James rightly said, we can often be wrong, which is fine. He's maybe benefiting from being slightly more of the attacking midfielder. I wouldn't call it an out and out 10, but certainly I think we've seen a slight pivot with Engels just moving back a bit and Hatate just moving forward a bit. Very subtle changes. They're not two out and out attacking eights anymore, and that little subtle change, I think, maybe benefiting him as well. And the other thing I think is that Martin O'Neill's more, I'm going to say, chaotic style of play, less structured, I think probably suits a free spirit like Hatate, who, as we've said before, is a jazz player in an orchestra. That's really where I would characterize him over the last four seasons, playing in highly kind of positionalized, structured football team. Well, he's actually a bit of a free spirit and likes to kind of do his own thing at his own pace and at his own tempo. And I think he's got more freedom to do that in this O'Neill team, which is a bit more game management aware, I would say, rather than just relentlessly pressing on with plan A. Um, what we've seen over the last week is the team respond to the game states and change approaches, change tempo, especially. And I think that off key and tempo switching style of play suits him down to the ground. So I think Rio will be sad when Martin O'Neill does finally, um, uh, depart. But will Wilfried Nancy similarly recognise his free spirit, and will his slightly less positional slightly more, relational style, might that suit him going forward? I don't know, but certainly what we've seen in the last 4 games is I would say, a massive and significant improvement in Hatate's performance levels.
Yeah, I think an example of that is I think it kind of brings the two topics that we were just discussing into one. Is that there was, and you watched the game back and captured your data already. So I have not rewatched the game, but I noticed it and actually commented in our huddlebreakdown.com chat area for our subscribers, that I think it looked more like a 4-2-3-1 out of possession. Whereas what worked
Mm.
so well at Feyenoord was kind of going back to what had been, I wouldn't say universal necessarily, but almost universal 4-4-2, out of possession, kind of defensive mid-block pressing structure where Hatate would be up top with the striker. He was falling back into where Nigren had been. That was one of the first switches that they made when Maloney and O'Neill came in, as they went to this kind of 4-2-3-1 out of possession. So that, I think that speaks to him being deployed in a different role. Having the other thing I've noticed is a lot more freedom just generally. It seems like the interchanging and the movement within the midfield has been a lot more dynamic than it had been. And again, this goes back to this issue of how much of it is structured chaos versus guys, just being told go out and play kind of thing. Go have fun, go express yourself. Again, more of the Neil Lennon school where it's less managed, micromanaged, let's say, on the positional play side. So there are lots of times noticing that Hatate is out on the right and Engels is on the left, and then you look 2 minutes later and they're switched, and then sometimes interchanging with McGregor, and McGregor's going and one of them's filling in for him. So it just seems that all looks like to some degree they're either being unleashed or told, instructed to have that freedom. And it seems to, like, a guy, if you're a jazz player, having some freedom to play some jazz music would probably be a more fulfilling thing. And just body language, he looks like he's expressing himself and just having a lot more fun as well. So, yeah, I mean, I'm hopeful, at least until January, that Nancy's the kind of guy who will kind of embrace that kind of thing. And this goes back to this idea of, do we have guys to play Nancy's system? And the two big things, and having looked at how he's played at Columbus Crew, that he demands of his sitting midfielders are being able to pass and be able to play jazz. I mean, really, both out of possession and in possession. I mean, it's very much a, like an amoeba type of situation. It's not guys being positional. And so neither guy, or, him and McGregor are not the prototypical defensive midfielders in that sense, but they have a lot of those capabilities. So I'll be excited to see if and when this ever does get consummated, how Nancy decides to go ahead and deploy them. Well, let's get into the specifics then on the Hibs performance, because I it's one of those things, outcome bias. It was it was kind of sticky to me. I felt it was an important context that I know you'll get into is we should absolutely discuss, and it's vital. But on another day, as they say, that could have easily been a draw. I think most of the expected points models had, let's say, 1-5, 1-4 type of scenario where Celtic win that match. So having rewatched the game, how would you assess it?
Yeah, I was slightly less nervous than I was watching it, I suppose, obviously. But I think because really, apart from the Cadden chance, they didn't really create much after they'd scored that wacky penalty. And it was really, other than the usual cavalcade of soft free kicks in and around the box, the main, there wasn't a lot of general danger there. They seemed to have kind of run out of ideas themselves, actually. So I don't think it was quite as stressful as watching it back. Obviously, the second time it never is, but there was that one chance that Cadden had, and Schmeichel again made a really good save with his feet. So I just felt, pointed out, especially Maeda, because Maeda wasn't really pressing like he normally does in the first half. And as I said, against one of the top, if not the top, pressing teams in the Europa League on Thursday, where they had like 6 players with between 25 and 30 pressures, and Maeda had 53. I thought we'd be rotating a lot more than we did, and I was very surprised that it was just the one change, and it looked like we got caught in a little bit of a tactical trap of, and this is the sort of tempo change I talked about, whereas I think under Ange we just keep going, under Rodgers, um, I think we would still try and play more or less the same way. Once we got those 2 goals up, it really was a case of, you know, almost basically defending with the ball, and just essentially what seems to have been introduced in the last 2 games is really trying to provoke the press, sort of De Zerbi like, the Brighton manager, as was, where you would just kind of almost stand on the ball and just say, "Well, come on then," and literally not move. And they've been doing a lot of that, and just trying to provoke the press, and then bang it out wide or what have you. And that's crept in. That's how we played a lot in the second half against Feyenoord, and it's pretty much we went straight to that against Hibs once we went 2-0 up. I just you can't. It's not obvious to tell whether players are tired, but the team did look fatigued in that second half, and I think they were just trying to manage their way to the end of the game, and you could tell at the end of the game what it meant to them. I think if the players felt that to go to Rotterdam and win in that way, and then to come to Easter Road, where Celtic have got an absolutely appalling record, and to then effectively grind out another win, I think they felt they'd done a good job. So I think on a professional level, you've got to respect that, accepting the XG negativity, the reliance on another goalkeeping dreadful mistake to kind of get out of what had been a pretty sticky start. Although again, after 20 minutes, Hibs had kind of that initial enthusiasm and that initial start they had petered out a little bit. So we were getting a foothold in the game, as it were, but clearly a gift as there were in Rotterdam. But we talked about earlier in the season, negative variance as regards goalkeeping performance. Players in Europe, especially banging them in from 40 yards or whatever into the top corner, and suddenly the keepers are making mistakes, and you're gifting you goals, and then the games are changing, you're getting goals in the last minute. So this is what we talk about. The impact of luck in football is, we don't talk about it very much in those terms, but essentially football is a sport in which luck plays a huge role, and it's all very for us smart arses to sit here and try and explain things as to what actually happened, but a lot of it's just down to luck. It really is. Yeah, and I think Celtic benefited from that this week, but I'd rather be relying on benefiting it from it in 3 really tough away games against really tough opponents than at home to Falkirk or at home to Livingston. Frankly,
Yep.
I think that's a good outcome for Celtic. So I'm not. It can't not having my cake and eat it, in the sense of saying, well, when Celtic have positive variance, it's fine. It doesn't mean that we're shit. And when they have, positive variance, they're shit. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that contextually, those were the good games to have that variance in, and it probably has a net positive in terms of the boost to confidence and morale and all of those things as well, going forward. Because the players should have no fear of any of the other Europa League games. I haven't got that one out of the way. I know we've got to play Roma at home and the top of Serie A, but they should have, playing at home, they should have no fear now, or if they ever did, or no less doubt, as it were. And being seen to rein in Hearts, who again, this fascinating variant stories, like Hearts, the Rangers, us. There's absolutely really, really, really rich stories in the topic of variance in all of those 3 cases, and we're having our little bit of positive now. So listen, take it.
100%. You take it when you can get it, and you hope that it is one of those fat tail incidents where you enjoy your luck longer than is normal, which absolutely happens, by the way. That was one of the fundamental, I don't know, criticism is too strong a word, but I disagreed with Brendan Rodgers' assessment of Celtic as he came into the job on his second tenure, because I felt like my analysis suggested that a material amount of the results in Ange's second season were inflated from positive variance. I mean, opposition keepers were so bad against us that season to an inordinate amount versus how they had played against everyone else. These things just, again, as I've looked into this more and more, it just kind of happens sometimes. It's just normal randomness. It's the same reason why you can get, 8 or 10 red on the roulette table in a row sometimes, and you keep betting black until you lose all your money because it's got to happen this time, right? So these things, the sequencing can just randomness can defy us at times. Such fine margin. I mentioned the McMenamin chance at St. Mirren, the Boyle chance in this game. I think it's the 11th minute or something like that.
Yeah.
If he scores that, and we've talked about how that's been one of their issues, is their finishing generally hasn't been great. Some of that could be luck and variance. Some of it could be maybe they're just not good finishers. And that there is a distribution on that as well, as far as quality, composure and skill and that type of thing. I shared your anxiety watching the game. I was quite nervous going into the game. I thought it was kind of a coin flip, which again, within a broader context, is its own indictment. The fact that we're at all in a position where we're going into a game, other than a derby where you're like, we should, we're not like a solid favorite. It just speaks to where things are at. But so let's talk real quick then a little bit about, not real quick, but a little bit about individual performances then. Anything stand out to you? I know, there's been a lot of, I always, I call it the dust effect, when or the halo effect, when results are good, people have their axes to grind. Engels was a great signing now. He's coming on into form. He's being unleashed. Trusty is the greatest ball playing right center back in the history of the world because we've won these games. I'm being, intentionally verbose here, but how have you seen the actual performances and particularly, the players in this game?
Yeah, I mean, I don't. In some senses, I don't think it changes a lot. I mean, McCowan on the right wing and Yang on the left is just not good. It isn't. And I know there's a lot of positive sentiment for Yang at the moment.
Yang Gang is back, baby. It will never die.
But I'm sorry, there was just so many poor decisions and so many poor executions. There was one. He did a brilliant turn to get into the box and get to hit the byline, and I think twice he did that, and then didn't find a Celtic player. And it's, if you could find a Celtic player in one of those two occasions, that's the level that you kind of need. But he very rarely, if ever, does, unfortunately. It was a bit odd that we kept going down the right, and I thought actually Yang was pretty, had a pretty good game in terms of the few occasions when he did get the ball and was able to run at the right-sided defender. I thought he did okay, but it didn't happen very often. It really didn't. And I think I like him in many respects in terms of his work off the ball. I think he's really good. I think he's a really aggressive defender. I think he comes back and fights for the ball in his own defensive third well. I think he's pretty strong actually. He's got quite good and good balance, I think. But it's just the attacking third output just isn't. It's not there. It just isn't there. I just don't see it's going to be there. I really don't. Best will in the world. This is probably the best version of him that we're getting at the moment. I know people criticize Tunetke, and he really is has got an issue in terms of final product, but he does have top end ability to get the ball forward and to carry the ball up the pitch consistently and get into the box. And I don't know what it'll take for him to learn that last thing, that last action. But that's really where he falls down. But getting there, at least getting the team up the pitch consistently, I think is worth something. So that one McCowan's doing a job. He's doing a job on the right. I don't think it adds a lot in terms of the output on that side. Donovan, bless him, really struggled. A couple of bad mistakes, letting players in. That tackle. Some referees would have given that as a straight red, I think, because he catches them quite high, and it is so out of control, and his legs straight. I think he was a bit fortunate there. And then Ralston came on, and Ralston was just so slow in everything that he did. He couldn't get the ball forward. Everything was negative. And he just seems to be really struggling for form. So they were the kind of negatives a little bit for me. Engels, I think, seems to be really settled in this sort of deeper role. And I think if you look at his defensive performances and you watch him off the ball, and you look at how he kind of mops up and fills gaps and is in generally the right place to stop attacks, I think that's his position. I really do. I don't think I don't think he's got much of a creative bone in his body other than free kicks and set plays and corners and so forth. I think he is better almost as a destructive player in a sense. But he's good technically. He's good. He's his first touch, his body shape, his ability to receive the ball in these deeper areas, I think is really good. He looks like a proper footballer to me. I think he is a good player. I think we're only now seeing maybe what might be his best role is that now whether he's doing that because he's beside McGregor, whether he could do it as a single pivot, I don't know. Maybe this is how sensitive these things are.
Yep.
But I do think he's having a good run at the moment. I really do. He does a lot of the stuff that people don't really see or don't really focus on. Just the getting in the way, getting the little foot in, holding the shape, pressing at the right time. He just does all those nasty things, I think, quite well. And probably football coaches, experienced football coaches, will see that. I mean, he didn't get into the Belgian team for nothing. But then they did play him as a number 10, which is just baffling. But anyway, so yeah, I'm kind of pleased with him. I think Trusty and Scales seem to like playing together. I think they were really good. I know Trusty had a couple of bumps with Bowie, but you're going to get that. Bowie's really good physically, and he knocks every defender off balance that I've seen. I thought in general Trusty played him pretty well, and so I thought Scales was excellent again. So unlucky with a penalty. I can't believe he said it. He said at the end of the game that it was a clear penalty. To me, again, I'm sure I'm biased, but it just seems to hit his shoulder. I mean, you could clearly see it hitting the t-shirt line, and therefore that's just a bizarre.
Yeah, the only
decision.
thing I can come up with, and I always, as you know, hesitant to get into the officiating stuff, is I think the determining factor there, and I'm not even sure it was intentional. It was probably just his body flottering around because of what he was trying to do, was his hand did go to ball. So, and if I don't even know at this point what the rule is. Um, I know I saw video angles. It looked like it might have hit his head, then his shoulder, then his hand, or just shoulder, or was it shoulder or arm? But I think the fact that his hand was going towards the ball was the determining part, that including the yellow. I mean, to me, that's probably the signifier that because the ball went towards hand, made it a yellow. But yeah, but that again, that was the bad luck part of it. And then you get the good luck that Donovan didn't get sent off. And it's these things pile on top of one another, and then trying to disaggregate everything into kind of a net balance of how it all played out. What I think that, again, the other thing I'll give him credit to, and going with Yang over Tanetki or McAllen out on the right, which I've kind of been mystified by a little bit, is get Maeda back through the middle. That's, I think, been a smart thing to do, because he just, not only with the pressing, which is had a direct impact on the last couple of games, but he's actually been okay dropping. Not great, but this is one of those games where he didn't make any horrific mistakes dropping in as a false nine, so to speak. So credit to him. I don't think that's necessarily the way we should be deploying him in any kind of volume, but he's just really good at getting on the end of things and pressuring defensive lines because they're constant. I mean, so that was the Kyogo thing too. I mean, just constantly petrified that he's going to get in behind. So again, credit due to O'Neill and Maloney for getting him back central like that. Yeah, Angles is still just so quixotic for me. I take all your points on off ball and bringing a little bit more of a physical presence, just coverage, getting around, which there's certainly value to that. He's another one where I think it'll be fascinating to see how it translates to the new manager. And that also opens up, as we kind of look forward. We talked about this quite a bit last week on the Extra Time show late in the week, is all of the risks now that Wilfried Nancy is coming into. I mean, just the flip side of wanting O'Neill to go out at the crest of this wave is that if by just nature the wave starts to come down, Mr. Nancy is going to be the recipient of all of the ill will, maybe, of just normal, retrenchment that might be happening, dropping some points here and there where just some of this stuff, the squad's not magically getting better between now and January 1st. So.
That's true, but we have to accept that, and you've got to build that in to your assessment. I mean, when I were a lad, your interaction with a game would be the match report in the newspaper on the day after, and then other than snippets as the week goes on, depending on what's signing news or whatever, injury news, that was it until the next game. But now we've got this void of, and it's partly our fault to fill 24/7 of content about the game. And so, like you say, if none, everything just gets amplified to a ridiculous degree. So if Nancy starts with a loss or what have you, doesn't win the League Cup final, it all gets amplified for days and days and days. But we have to be pretty. I personally, and what I want to hold myself to is, this is a scenario that he's walking into. This isn't going to change. The risks are all there. They're there now. And but what I would say, and this is I'm going to go a little bit off brand here. Right, I've spent a lot of time this season, especially the last few weeks, watching the Hearts games, watching the Rangers games as well, because I think it's fascinating, the league this season.
Motherwell,
and Motherwell
amazing.
Motherwell were terrific. If they could score goals, they'd be top of the league. They're really good. But they don't. They struggle to, and that's why they'll probably be fifth, maybe. I don't know. But no, they're terrific. They're great fun. They certainly, I would say, with a better team against Hearts for sure. I I don't. What I'm going to say is, and you can bookmark this, and I can get battered by this later in the season. Is I just think Nancy. I don't think he needs to come in and be terrific. I don't think he needs to come in and be like Ange. I just think he needs to be competent. I really do. I think he just needs to be competent. The underlying data, Celtic, despite all of the horrible kind of mood and lack of energy of Rodgers' last few matches in charge, and all the injury and negative variance earlier in the season, etc., are still, I would say, he's got the strongest squad. And watching Hearts, watching the Rangers, I'd be surprised if at the end of the season we're not 10 points ahead of Hearts and 20 points ahead of the Rangers at the end of the season. Again, I don't normally do this. I don't normally say things like that. Bookmark it. I'll get slaughtered later. That's fine. And I reserve the right to change my opinion at the end of the transfer window when I see what people have done. But as it stands at the moment, with the current squads,
right,
I just think I don't think Nancy's under pressure to be amazing. I just think he needs to be competent. He just needs to be coherent and competent. And I think, given the state of the league this season, that will be enough. I think Hearts will improve, but not under the current manager. And I don't see the Rangers improving because I think the players are terrible by and large. I don't think little Danny Rowe's going to be able to do much about that, frankly. So that's there you go. I don't normally do predictions, and and the picture of the omelette over my head. Get clipping, guys and girls. I'm sure it'll be brought out later. That's just the way I feel about it. And as I say, I'm not. You know me, I'm normally very risk aware, and whereas I think you might take more of a downbeat view than me on most things, I still try and be as balanced as I can. I'm just giving an honest opinion based on what I've seen.
Yeah. No, I think that's all fair. What I would say is that I'm still concerned about, from a Celtic specifically. This is why I think, you know, our friend Gavin at Scotland Coefficient, I think he's in the process of trying to renew the old Rangers Report Twitter account, the gentleman behind that who's done these kind of ex-ante forecasting
Yeah,
exercises. And one of the things about when you do any of that kind of futuristic modeling is that when you bank points, that's a big deal. Like it shifts probabilities. And because you can't take them away, obviously. And so the fact that we've benefited from some of this positive luck in these fixtures, they're in the bank, baby. So every little bit that we get from now into January is in the bank, but we're not there yet. And that this is my concern, is that we've enjoyed some of these positive things. It'd be different if we were being managed in kind of an obvious, coherent way, which I'm hoping Nancy brings to the table. But there are limitations to this because he's going to have to come, like Danny Rolls had it at Rangers. And I'm just comparing it because of the transition, which is as much film as you watch, you can't know until you actually get in the building and talk to people and start working in training. There's not going to be much time for training. So we talked about this last week. He's never done this before. He's never come in as a manager intra-season before, let alone into this kind of a complex situation with a literal icon having just done what he's done at the top of the wave. And, you know, we talk about underlying performance. You know, Steve Robinson's talked a little bit about it. I mean, St. Mirren's been a little negative beneficiary recently. I know they haven't been great. I'm not saying that, but they haven't been as bad as what the results would suggest. So, you know, that cup final's not good. You know, they're going to make it miserable. That's what they're very good at.
Well, right? I mean, I'm not being patronizing when I say this, but this is the biggest game of these players' lives. They will leave everything on that field. Of course they
100%.
And rightly so. Yeah.
And they've got some good athletes. I mean, that's what they lack maybe on technical ability. They don't pretend, and we'll preview this obviously when we get there. But what I'm saying is it would not be crazy for us to lose that cup final. I mean, I don't think it's going to happen. It's not likely. But given the cauldron that Nancy's coming into, so I worry getting to January because of these dynamics, the pressure cooker coming up, and a lot of it not really, just as the some of the issues that Martin O'Neill inherited had nothing to do with him. Nancy's going to come in, and we just hope kind of that a lot of this stuff, including stuff that can't be controlled, kind of breaks our way a little bit, because I'm still worried that if they don't, God forbid, if they don't, you know, there's room between not breaking your way and then breaking against you. So there's also a scenario where we just have some crap luck and we drop some points in games that we should have won. Like, good segue to Wednesday's fixture against Dundee at home. This would be one that you'd say 95% of the time, 3 points, not only 3 points, you know, a 3-0, 4-0 kind of game. Dundee are objectively the worst team in the league. No, the table's lying, Derek McInnes.
McInnes would not agree with you.
And they've benefited a little bit, some positive luck in the recent fixtures, kind of up and down a little bit, alternating positive luck for them recently. So let's talk about Dundee briefly, and then we'll wrap it up, because I mean, this is the flip side of this, which is it sure would be a nice game to have Nancy come in and kind of get some shine in his first game. Flip side of that, well, we're happy because hopefully it's a celebration of Martin O'Neill and him coming back and going into the breach, so to speak. So quick thoughts on Dundee and how awful they actually are, because we talked about this going into the Kilmarnock game, how bad Kilmarnock have been, and Dundee have been a fair bit worse.
Oh yeah, yeah, but everything you've just said there just highlights what a distraction all this is from the football. This is why I'm saying we need to get the guy in and just get back to a level set of this is business as usual rather than it being this emotional roller coaster. 'Cause it doesn't it gets exhausting for everybody as well mentally.
Especially for us old
I mean,
guys. Good Lord.
well, within the club, I'm more thinking. Um, the longer the season goes on, the more that loss to Dundee, to me, under Rodgers is almost like I'm not. It's not as bad as losing at home to Queens Park in the Scottish Cup, but it's more in that neighbourhood than not. It was just the most appalling to lose to a team that. I mean, Celtics with their resources should not be losing 2-0 to a team of that standard. It's just ridiculous.
It was
No,
like,
they're
was it
not.
Ross County we lost to in the 10 in a row season in the autumn during
Yeah,
that cascade of
yeah.
debacle? Yeah.
That was Lennon's last game, I think, wasn't it? Home to Ross County. I think that was
Was that the
the
one?
last league
Okay.
game.
Yeah.
Did we
Okay.
lose the league? Did we lose a cup game as well? There, I can't remember. But it was a catastrophic defeat, really, against a team that, although yeah, they're not bottom of the league, but if you look at any of the models, they are by some distance the worst team in the league by all the underlying sort of XG type models. So, on the, and they're and again they beat us 2-0. Their primary issue is they can't score goals. They just incapable of scoring goals. I mean, I know Simon Murray's been struggling with injuries, but what is he, 34, 35 now? And he's your best bet for a goal. That's tricky. That's a lot of pressure on him for all the good hard work that he does. And who else have they got? They've eroded their talent that they had. Lyle Cameron and obviously McCowan over the last couple of years have not really been replaced for like. So yes, they've got a lot of kind of big sturdy guys. And a bit of physicality about them, and definitely that set piece threat. But just in terms of sheer talent and ability and goal threat, this is a game that Celtic should win comfortably. And I haven't prepared for this yet, but I will do on the site. I'll write up a quick scout report like I normally do on this for the week. I'll do that for tomorrow, by the way. So there's my commitment, and I'll look at them a little bit more deeply. But in some ways, maybe it is better that there is O'Neill's last game. It's not this all suddenly there's all this hype and pressure around Nancy. Yeah, you see, you've got this kind of like more celebratory filter. Maybe that's a good thing. That we can just a game that the players can and O'Neill can relax into and enjoy it almost, and just because you need a few of these in this December run. They've all been a bit tense the last week. So whereas if it was Nancy in his first game, I think it'd be quite intense. Whereas it's going to be like that anyway against Hearts, so I don't think it's going to make much difference if it's Nancy, frankly.
Yeah. The one thing, and again, we try to dream up scenarios at times where, how could this go poorly? Is Dundee are probably the most passive team in the league. So despite them having the lowest amount of possession, they actually don't defend that much. What do I mean? They don't actually like engage opposition players with the ball anywhere near as much as one would normally think, given that they have so little of the ball. So that they tend to not, create as much space with going after the ball. So they're more zonal and parking the bus. Basically, they have the deepest defensive line. So I suspect that would be if it's one of those games where they're going to just camp and put 10 guys behind the ball around the 18, and we have a bad day with our shooting boots. Like that's the scenario here. And this goes back to, I think, one of the criticisms that, I shouldn't say criticisms, concerns people have about Nancy coming in is he's never faced this kind of team that we're going to see on Wednesday, which is passive and just bunkering. But I think that's overwrought because we talk about Falkirk doesn't do that. Motherwell certainly doesn't do that anymore. There's just a lot less teams that we come up against that do this. So I guess there's some risk to familiarity. Like we're not, and this regime under O'Neill playing this way with these selections haven't come across this yet to this degree. Kilmarnock maybe a little bit, but
So I wanted
So,
to ask you about one of the things which I knew about the MLS, but didn't really work out the implications of it in my head explicitly, is this idea that there is no relegation,
mhm,
and then like half the teams in each conference league or whatever it is get into the playoffs. So that all suggests to me that like 60-70% of the games are utterly meaningless and have no jeopardy associated with them at all, which must be awful. But how different is he going to be aware that, and again, he's not American, he's French, so he is European, right? That, like the game tomorrow, Dundee are going to be fighting for their lives because there's a genuine relegation threat there. And
yeah,
if this game has been played in March, it would be the same. There'd be no like, oh well, we can't make the playoffs, or we're already in the playoffs or whatever, and it doesn't matter what we do, kind of thing. There must be so many games in the MLS
yeah,
that are like that. It's like, oh, one team's got nothing to play for really, and therefore, how does that? Because as much as you know, people are professional, they're also human beings, and if you don't have
yep.
to go out and risk a red card, because your livelihood's at stake, you're not going to do it, are you?
Yeah, and I guess my retort to that is I think that's mostly on the player level as opposed to the coaching level. That's kind of ubiquitous in North American sports. So it's an issue of coaches falling on deaf ears because the players get demotivated, that kind of thing. I think that becomes an issue because generally speaking, coaches are professional and hyper competitive and working for their job. They're the release valve on no relegation, is that you get a lot of turnover in coaching jobs. So yeah, I think it's more so a player issue than it is a coaching issue. So hopefully, and everything I've read and heard about and listened to his interviews, part of why I find his appointment appealing is he seems to be a process driven person, which I think is how effective people operate, rather than saying, "Oh, I have this goal and then we'll figure it out."
Mhm.
It's no, I have a process that I implement, training, analytically, all of these recovery, all of these things, and that produces results.
Yeah.
And as long as you trust the process and you have a high quality process that you're constantly trying to make better, then the results kind of, and that people have taken his comments about that kind of stuff and used it again. People that are worried or don't like the appointment, um, they'll use that as a cudgel to hit him with, saying, "Oh, he
Mm.
doesn't care about winning; he cares about his style of football," or which I get, but that's not what process is about. Um, so yeah, so I think he'll be fine. That's not the issue. I just think, again, back to the Martin O'Neill conversation and the fact that the dire state of the squad is still the dire state of the squad, and that even if you could have Nancy come in and raise performance levels and luck swing against us
Yeah, yeah.
and get versus what we've had, which is performance levels picked up a little bit versus the dire descent that they had reached towards the latter stages under Rodgers, but still not levels that they're still right around that one non-penalty XG differential, or where we always talk about that threshold of nervousness. Um, so we
No, I
just
agree, but I think that holds true for other teams in the league and to a greater extent.
100%. Yep, and that's how those all interact. All of that volatility. This goes back to one of my
Mm.
criticisms of Hearts under Derek McInnes is the volatility. So
Yeah.
when you have an inherently more volatile way of doing things, then that lends itself to greater um, bad luck at times and streaks of bad
Po-
luck.
Imposing Kilmarnock-style chaos ball on quite a talented group of footballers would be would be the outworking of that.
Yes, that and we talked about this a couple of weeks ago that December would be a stress test of his tenure because with injuries and then rotation and fixture congestion, how's he going to manage that? And so far, delightfully. I mean, just
Yeah,
I
I mean,
think
we mustn't underestimate, by the way, the fact that we play Wednesday again, but they play Wednesday as well. So we play them at the weekend. They'll have had a midweek game too. Now that because generally speaking, because they're not in Europe, they've had this extra time to prepare for every league game, and I think that's been quite important to them.
I agree. And I don't have it to share. I'll probably do it later in the week. But one of the things that they have been good at, and Motherwell even more so, on an effectiveness basis, is counterpressing. And that's kind of an unsexy aspect of what's going on at Motherwell. But Askew's looks like he's a terrific coach when it comes to counterpress, which we've lauded. Brendan Rodgers during his tenure, he was a very good coach of that. McInnes is very good coach at getting them to do it. I'm not sure how effective they are. But most importantly, what that does is it creates a lot of fast twitch muscle stress and fatigue issues, which leads to injury risks and guys, running out of gas in a long December of fixtures. So I agree with you. All of these things are stress tests and how they'll manage it. But we'll preview that game on Extra Time in robustness. I think Friday we'll be recording that this week. So as always, everyone, thank you for joining us. That's it for Extra Time, for the Huddle Breakdown this week. If you can subscribe on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast, that would be great. We appreciate it. And check us out, all of our written and multimedia content that we put out on huddlebreakdown.com and the community of spreadsheet shaggers that we've built over the last year plus. We'd appreciate it. So thanks again, and we'll talk to you next week.